Margaret sat in stunned silence for the remainder of the dinner, her mind racing as she processed the full weight of what had just occurred. While her family continued their animated conversations about career achievements and social plans, she found herself truly seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. The son she had sacrificed everything to raise had become a cold, calculating man who valued image over family. The daughter-in-law she had supported and welcomed had revealed herself to be shallow and cruel. The granddaughters she had loved unconditionally had grown into entitled young women who viewed her as nothing more than an embarrassing relic. As she mechanically went through the motions of finishing her meal, Margaret's thoughts turned to her late husband, Thomas. He had been a man of principle who never tolerated disrespect or cruelty. "Maggie," he used to say, "you teach people how to treat you by what you accept." She realized with painful clarity that she had taught her family that they could treat her terribly without consequences. The drive home was conducted in tense silence, with Margaret sitting alone in the back seat while the family discussed weekend plans that clearly didn't include her. When David dropped her off at her modest home without even walking her to the door, Margaret stood on her front porch and watched them drive away without a backward glance. For the first time in years, she didn't wave goodbye. Inside her quiet house, surrounded by photos of the family she had devoted her life to, Margaret made herself a cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table. She opened the drawer where she kept important documents and pulled out her will, her financial statements, and the deed to her home. For the first time in decades, she examined her assets not as resources to be shared with her ungrateful family, but as her own financial security. Margaret was surprised to discover that despite her years of generous giving, she was actually quite well off. Her pension from 35 years of teaching, combined with Social Security and the modest investments she had maintained, provided her with a comfortable income. Her home, located in what was now considered a desirable historic district, had appreciated significantly in value. The life insurance policy Thomas had left her, which she had never touched, had grown substantially over the years. The next morning, Margaret made several phone calls. First, she contacted her old friend Robert Harrison, a retired attorney who had handled her husband's estate years ago. She explained the situation carefully and asked him to recommend someone who specialized in estate planning and elder law. Within hours, she had an appointment with Jennifer Walsh, a sharp young lawyer who came highly recommended for her work protecting seniors' rights and assets. Margaret also called her longtime financial advisor, explaining that she wanted to review all her accounts and investments. She had been allowing David to handle many of her financial affairs in recent years, giving him power of attorney over several accounts for convenience. She now realized this had been a mistake that needed to be corrected immediately. That afternoon, as Margaret sat in Jennifer Walsh's office, she felt a strength she hadn't experienced in years. The lawyer listened carefully to her story, taking notes and asking pointed questions about her family's treatment and their expectations regarding inheritance. Jennifer explained Margaret's rights and options with a clarity that was both empowering and liberating. "Mrs. Thornton," Jennifer said, "you have every right to protect your assets and ensure your golden years are lived with dignity and respect. No one, family or otherwise, has the right to treat you as anything less than the accomplished, generous woman you are." 3 weeks after the restaurant humiliation, Margaret had quietly but systematically taken control of her life and finances. She had revoked David's power of attorney, restructured her will, and made several strategic decisions that would ensure her independence and dignity. But her most decisive action was yet to come. The opportunity presented itself at the annual Millfield Community Foundation Gala, a prestigious charity event that David and Veronica attended every year to network with potential clients and maintain their social standing. Margaret had been buying tickets to this event for years, though her family usually discouraged her from attending, suggesting she wouldn't fit in with their crowd. This year, Margaret not only bought a ticket, but purchased an entire table. She invited several of her former teaching colleagues, her friends from the Literacy Center, and her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, a retired professor who had become a close confidant in recent weeks. Margaret also made sure that word of her generous sponsorship reached the event organizers, who were delighted to honor one of the community's most respected former educators. On the night of the gala, Margaret arrived looking radiant in an elegant, navy dress she had purchased specifically for the occasion. Her silver hair was styled professionally, and she wore her grandmother's diamond earrings, jewelry she had been saving for special occasions that never seemed to come. She looked every inch the distinguished woman she had always been, but had somehow forgotten she was. The surprise on David and Veronica's faces when they spotted Margaret at the head table, being introduced as one of the evening's honored guests, was unmistakable. Their shock deepened when the Master of Ceremonies announced that Margaret Elizabeth Thornton, beloved educator and community volunteer, had made a substantial donation to establish a literacy program for underprivileged children. During the Aid program, Margaret was invited to the stage to speak about the importance of education and community service. Her speech was eloquent, heartfelt, and received a standing ovation from the crowd of over 300 attendees. As she spoke about the joy of nurturing young minds and the responsibility of giving back to one's community, her eyes found her family's table. David sat frozen, his face pale, while Veronica's mouth hung open in obvious disbelief. After the ceremony, as Margaret mingled with well-wishers and old friends who praised her generous contribution and inspiring words, David finally approached her. His face was a mixture of confusion, anger, and something that might have been embarrassment. "Mom, what is this about?" he demanded in a harsh whisper. "How could you donate that much money without discussing it with me? That was money I was counting on for the girls' college funds." Margaret looked at her son with a calm she had never felt before. "David, it's my money to donate as I see fit. And I find it interesting that you're more concerned about your inheritance than proud of your mother's charitable giving." Veronica joined them, her face flushed with anger. "Margaret, this is completely irresponsible. You can't just throw away the family's future like this. What about our financial security?" "Your financial security?" Margaret's voice remained steady, though her eyes flashed with steel. "I believe you and David are quite capable of providing for your own family. After all, isn't that what successful adults do?" The twins, dressed in expensive gowns that Margaret had unknowingly paid for through her years of financial gifts, stood nearby looking uncomfortable. Emma, the same granddaughter who had called her embarrassing just weeks before, now seemed to realize that their grandmother was the center of attention and admiration from everyone around them. Margaret turned to address her entire family. "I want you all to know that I've made some important decisions about my life and my assets. I'm no longer the woman who will accept disrespect and cruelty in exchange for your grudging tolerance of my presence. I'm no longer someone who can be embarrassed by your thoughtless words or made to feel ashamed of who I am." David's voice rose slightly, causing other guests to glance over. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. You can't just—" "I can't what, David?" Margaret interrupted, her dignity intact despite his attempt to intimidate her. "I can't expect basic respect from my family? I can't make decisions about my own money? I can't attend social events without being told I'm an embarrassment?" The conversation was beginning to attract attention from other gala attendees, and Margaret could see the panic in Veronica's eyes as she realized their family drama was becoming public. This was exactly the kind of scene Veronica had always accused Margaret of creating, except now it was David and Veronica who were making the spectacle. Margaret smiled serenely and spoke just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear clearly. "I've decided to live my remaining years surrounded by people who value and respect me. I've also made some changes to my will and financial arrangements that I think you'll find quite illuminating." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving her family standing in stunned silence while she rejoined her friends, who welcomed her back with warm smiles and animated conversation about her wonderful speech. The aftermath of the gala confrontation sent shockwaves through the Thornton family. Within days, David received a certified letter from Margaret's attorney outlining the changes to her will and financial arrangements. The contents were staggering and left the family reeling from the reality of their new situation. Margaret had removed David as the primary beneficiary of her estate, instead establishing a charitable trust that would benefit literacy programs and educational scholarships. Her house, which David and Veronica had been counting on inheriting, was now designated to be sold upon her death, with proceeds going to the foundation she had established. The modest inheritance that remained for David was contingent upon him, demonstrating genuine respect and appreciation for his mother over a sustained period of at least 2 years. More immediately impactful, Margaret had also cut off all financial support to the family. The monthly gifts that had helped subsidize their upscale lifestyle, the private school tuition she had been paying for the twins, and the emergency fund she had always made available were all terminated immediately. The family discovered just how dependent they had become on Margaret's quiet financial contributions when their first month without her support left them struggling to maintain their expensive lifestyle. David's first reaction was anger and disbelief. He arrived at Margaret's house unannounced 3 days after receiving the legal documents, his face red with fury. "Mom, you can't do this!" he shouted as soon as she opened the door. "This is vindictive and cruel. You're punishing your own family over a silly misunderstanding." Margaret remained calm, though she didn't invite him inside. "There was no misunderstanding, David. You and your family made it very clear that you find me embarrassing and burdensome. I'm simply arranging my affairs to ensure I won't be a burden to you any longer." "But Mom, we need that money. The girls' private school, our mortgage payments, Veronica's business expenses. We've built our lives around your support." "Then perhaps you should have built your lives around gratitude and respect instead," Margaret replied quietly. "You had 45 years to learn how to treat your mother with dignity. I had to reach 73 to learn that I deserve better." Veronica arrived moments later, clearly having followed David to the house. Her approach was different, manipulative, tears, and desperate pleading. "Margaret, please, I know we haven't always been perfect, but the girls need stability. You can't punish them for our mistakes. Think about Emma and Sophia's futures." "I am thinking about their futures," Margaret said firmly. "I'm thinking that growing up with consequences for their cruelty might teach them to become better people than their parents." The twins themselves attempted their own intervention later that week. Emma and Sophia arrived at Margaret's door with carefully rehearsed apologies and promises to do better. But their words rang hollow, clearly coached by their parents and motivated by financial desperation rather than genuine remorse. "Grandma, we're really sorry about what we said," Emma began, her voice artificially sweet. "We didn't mean it. We love you so much, and we want to spend more time with you." Margaret studied her granddaughters carefully. "Girls, I appreciate your apology, but I need you to understand something important. Love isn't just words, it's actions. For years, your actions have shown me that I'm an inconvenience in your lives. If you truly want a relationship with me, you'll need to prove it through consistent respect and kindness, not desperate promises when money is involved." As weeks passed, the family's financial situation became increasingly precarious. Without Margaret's monthly contributions, they had to make difficult choices. The twins had to leave their expensive private school and enroll in the public school system. Veronica had to downsize her real estate office and let go of several employees. David found himself working longer hours to make up for the income shortfall, creating stress in his career and marriage. The social embarrassment was perhaps even more difficult for them to bear. Their friends and colleagues began to ask questions about why Margaret was suddenly so prominent in community charitable work while seeming estranged from her family. The story of the gala confrontation had spread through their social circles, and not in a way that painted David and Veronica in a flattering light. Margaret, meanwhile, was thriving. Free from the emotional drain of her family's constant demands and criticism, she had more energy than she'd felt in years. She joined a book club, took up watercolor painting, and became more involved in community organizations. Her friends marveled at the transformation, noting how much lighter and happier she seemed. The most telling moment came during a chance encounter at the grocery store, where Margaret ran into Mrs. Patterson, one of Veronica's real estate colleagues. "Margaret!" Mrs. Patterson exclaimed. "You look absolutely wonderful. I heard about your lovely speech at the Foundation Gala, and what a generous donation. You must be so proud of the literacy program you're establishing." Margaret smiled genuinely. "Thank you, Helen. I'm finding that giving back to the community is incredibly fulfilling. It's wonderful to feel valued and appreciated for who you are." The comment wasn't lost on Veronica, who had been standing nearby and overheard the conversation. The irony was palpable. Complete strangers were treating Margaret with more respect and admiration than her own family ever had. 6 months after the gala confrontation, Margaret's life had transformed in ways she had never imagined possible. Her small home had become a hub of activity, with friends regularly stopping by for tea, former students visiting to share their life updates, and literacy volunteers meeting for planning sessions. The house that David and Veronica had once dismissed as inappropriate was now filled with laughter, meaningful conversation, and genuine affection. Margaret's charitable work had brought her recognition throughout the community. The literacy program she had funded was already showing remarkable results, with dozens of children improving their reading skills through one-on-one tutoring. Local newspapers had featured her story, celebrating her as an unsung hero of education, who was making a real difference in young lives. Her social calendar was fuller than it had been in decades. She had joined a senior travel group and was planning her first trip to Europe, something she had dreamed of doing since her 20s, but had always postponed for family obligations. Her watercolor paintings were displayed in a local gallery, and she had discovered a talent she never knew she possessed. The Thornton family, by contrast, was still struggling to adjust to their new reality. David had been forced to take on additional clients to maintain their lifestyle, putting strain on his health and marriage. Veronica's real estate business had suffered without the financial cushion Margaret had provided, and she had to let go of her expensive office space. The twins, now attending public school, were learning difficult lessons about entitlement and consequences. The family had made several more attempts at reconciliation, but each one felt hollow and self-serving. Their apologies were always followed by requests for financial assistance or complaints about their current hardships. Margaret had remained cordially distant, polite, but no longer emotionally available to be manipulated or guilt-tripped. The defining moment came on Margaret's 74th birthday. She had planned a small celebration with her new circle of friends, but David called that morning with what sounded like a genuine invitation to dinner. "Mom, we'd really like to take you out for your birthday," he said, his voice lacking its usual demanding tone. "Just family. We've all been doing a lot of thinking, and we want to make things right." Margaret considered the invitation carefully. "David, I appreciate the gesture, but I need you to understand that our relationship has permanently changed. I'm no longer the woman who will accept crumbs of affection in exchange for financial support. If you truly want to rebuild our relationship, it will take years of consistent respect and effort, not one birthday dinner." "Mom, please. The girls have really missed you. Veronica admits she was wrong about how she treated you. We all do." "Then prove it through your actions over time," Margaret replied firmly. "I've learned that I don't need to settle for relationships built on obligation and convenience. I have friends who value me, a community that respects me, and a life filled with purpose and joy. If you want to be part of that life, you'll need to earn your place in it." That evening, Margaret celebrated her birthday with 23 friends and former colleagues at a lovely restaurant downtown. The conversation was stimulating, the laughter genuine, and the affection heartfelt. As she looked around the table at faces that lit up when they saw her, she realized she had never felt more loved or respected in her entire life. During the dinner, her friend Robert Harrison, the retired attorney who had first connected her, with legal help, stood to make a toast. "To Margaret," he said, raising his glass. "A woman who taught us all that it's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. You've shown us that dignity isn't something you're born with or inherit, it's something you claim for yourself." As the group applauded, Margaret felt tears of joy rather than sorrow for perhaps the first time in years. She had learned that respect was not something you could earn through endless giving and sacrifice to people determined to take you for granted. True respect had to be demanded, boundaries had to be set, and sometimes love meant stepping away from those who couldn't appreciate your worth. The story of Margaret Elizabeth Thornton became something of a legend in Millfield. At community events and charitable functions, people would point her out as the woman who had transformed her life at 73, who had chosen dignity over family dysfunction, and who had turned her pain into purpose through charitable giving and community involvement. Her literacy program continued to grow, eventually serving over 200 children annually. Margaret remained actively involved, often reading to children and sharing the joy of learning that had defined her career. The children adored her, calling her Grandma Margaret and making her homemade cards that covered her refrigerator. As for the Thornton family, they eventually came to understand the magnitude of what they had lost. Margaret's transformation, from accommodating grandmother to independent, respected community leader, served as a daily reminder of how badly they had misjudged and mistreated her. Some relationships can be repaired with time and genuine effort, but some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. Margaret had learned the most important lesson of her life, that teaching people how to treat you is one of the most crucial skills anyone can master. She had spent decades accepting poor treatment in the name of keeping peace and showing love, only to discover that true peace comes from self-respect, and genuine love requires mutual respect and appreciation. On quiet evenings in her comfortable home, surrounded by books and art and photos of her new chosen family of friends, Margaret would sometimes reflect on the restaurant incident that had changed everything. She no longer felt anger or bitterness toward David, Veronica, and the twins. Instead, she felt profound gratitude for the painful wake-up call that had led her to reclaim her life and discover her worth. The woman who had once been called embarrassing had indeed embarrassed her family, not through any fault of her own, but by showing the entire community what grace, dignity, and genuine generosity looked like. In learning to value herself, Margaret had become invaluable to everyone whose life she touched, except for those who had taken her for granted for far too long. Her story served as a powerful reminder that it's never too late to choose yourself, to demand respect, and to build a life filled with people who celebrate rather than merely tolerate your presence. Margaret Elizabeth Thornton had finally claimed her place at the head table of her own life, and she never looked back.